Terry Pratchett's Discworld is a comic fantasy universe with a warm, sharp, satirical tone. Across the books, the reading experience is curious, humane, funny, and surprisingly thoughtful. The broad setting is a wide imagined world of cities, guilds, witches, gods, guards, and ordinary people trying to make sense of absurd systems. The reason Discworld intimidates new readers is not difficulty, it is size. There are many books, and the shelf can look like one giant ladder. That is the wrong mental model. Discworld works more like a city with several doors. You do not need to enter through every door at once. For a first-time reader, the goal is not to prove dedication. The goal is to choose the door that gives the clearest version of the experience. This guide is built around one decision. Start with Guards. Guards if you want the safest first book for most people. Keep Mort, Small Gods, and Wyrd Sisters as taste-based alternates. Then use Men-at-Arms, Feet of Clay, and Jingo as a simple next path if the City Watch tone works for you. That is why this video does not cover the full Discworld shelf. A complete map is useful later. A first step is more useful today. Guards. This is the best first Discworld book for most new readers, because it gives you a complete taste of the series, without asking for background knowledge. It has the city setting, the absurd institutions, the moral warmth, and the dry comic intelligence that people mean when they say they love Discworld. It also gives the reader a very stable frame. You are not dropped into a cosmic joke with no handrail. You are placed inside a recognizable problem space, where public order, civic laziness, old habits, and strange fantasy logic all rub against each other. That matters for beginners. The early Discworld books can feel more like direct fantasy parody. Guards feels closer to the long-running Discworld voice that made the series endure. It is still funny, but the comedy is not only there for jokes, it points at power, institutions, duty, and the way people behave when a system has trained them to expect very little from itself. You can read it as a fantasy comedy. You can also read it as a gentle civic satire with dragons and uniforms. That double layer is the reason it works so well as a first book. The important beginner rule is simple. Do not worry about publication order yet. Start where the series becomes easy to understand emotionally. For most people, that place is Guards. Mort is the best alternate if you want the stranger, more mythic side of Discworld first. It is still approachable, but it leans into the series as a place where huge ideas can be handled with a surprisingly light touch. The reading experience is less like joining a city investigation and more like watching a familiar human concern get translated into comic fantasy logic. That makes it a strong start for readers who enjoy ideas more than systems. It is also a good first pick if you have heard that Discworld can be funny without becoming shallow. The reason Mort is not my default first recommendation is that its appeal is slightly more specific. Some readers want the social texture of Ankh-Morpork before they move into the more symbolic corners of the universe. Other readers want exactly the opposite. They want the weirdness early. They want to know why these books can take a large concept and make it feel personal, readable, and humane. For that reader, Mort is a clean doorway. Treat Mort as a legitimate first book, not as a compromise. It shows a major Discworld lane without requiring the full shelf. If Guards sounds too civic or too procedural for your taste, Mort may be the better emotional match. The key is not finding the official first book. The key is finding the first book that makes you want a second one. Small Gods. Small Gods is the best alternate if you want one Discworld book that feels unusually complete on its own. It is often recommended because it does not require a sub-series commitment. You can read it, understand the tone, and walk away with a clear sense of Pratchett's intelligence without asking which volume comes next. That is valuable for a reader who is curious but cautious. It is also useful for anyone who wants the philosophical side of Discworld before the recurring cast structure. The experience here is sharper and more focused than a broad city entry. The book is interested in belief, authority, certainty, and the difference between an idea and the institution that claims to protect it. That sounds heavy, but Discworld usually works by making heavy ideas readable rather than by flattening them. Small Gods is a strong example of that gift. It is funny, but the humor has a point. It is thoughtful, but it does not require academic patience. I would not use Small Gods as the default for every beginner, because it can give a slightly unusual first impression of the wider series. It is more standalone and more concentrated than many Discworld routes. Still, if you want one book before deciding whether the larger universe is for you, Small Gods is one of the cleanest choices. Start here if your favorite fantasy is idea-driven rather than sequence-driven. Wyrd Sisters. Wyrd Sisters is the best alternate if you want the witch side of Discworld first. It gives you folklore energy, theatrical wit, rural texture, and a different kind of comedy from the City Watch route. Where Guards makes the city feel like a living machine, Wyrd Sisters makes tradition, stories, and social expectation feel like forces people have to navigate. That difference matters, because Discworld is not one repeated formula. Its best entry point depends partly on the kind of fantasy language you already enjoy. Choose Wyrd Sisters if you like plays, village politics, folktale logic, and satire aimed at the stories societies tell about themselves. It is a beginner-friendly route, but it is not the broadest route. It shows one of the great Discworld lanes, rather than the entire map. That is not a weakness. It simply means this is a taste match. If the phrase comic fantasy makes you imagine loud jokes, this book is a useful correction. Discworld humor is often about pattern recognition. It notices how people use stories to justify power, comfort, and habit. Wyrd Sisters is not the first pick I would give to everyone, but if the witch route sounds more attractive than guards, gods, or metaphysical comedy, it can be the right first book. Discworld rewards choosing the door that matches your curiosity. Men-at-Arms. If guards works for you, Men-at-Arms is the most natural next step because it keeps the same broad lane and deepens it. The important thing for a beginner is not that you memorize every Discworld connection. The important thing is that you feel the series becoming richer without losing the reason you started. Men-at-Arms lets that happen. It takes the civic comedy, the watch structure, and the city texture, then gives them more pressure and more social range. This is where many readers begin to understand why the city watch route is such a reliable Discworld path. The books can be funny scene by scene, but they also keep asking how a city functions when its rules, myths, guilds, and prejudices all overlap. That gives the route a sense of momentum. You are not reading a random sequel because a list told you to. You are following a lane that becomes more confident as it goes. For a new reader, that confidence is reassuring. Route Men-at-Arms after guards if you want the safest continuation. It is not necessary if you decided that Mort, Small Gods, or Wyrd Sisters is more your taste, but if your first reaction to guards is that you like the city, the institutions, and the dry moral comedy, this is the next book that protects that momentum. It turns one good start into an actual route. Feet of Clay. Feet of Clay is the next step when you already know that the city watch lane is working for you. By this point, you are not only checking whether Discworld is funny, you are checking whether you enjoy the way Pratchett uses fantasy tools to think about identity, labor, institutions, and social roles. Feet of Clay is useful because it keeps the route accessible while making the reader feel the extra depth that sits under the jokes. This is also where the beginner mistake changes. At the start, the mistake is trying to read the whole universe in one fixed order. Later, the mistake is bouncing away too soon because you think you have already understood the formula. The City Watch books are not just the same joke with new scenery. They become more layered as the city becomes more legible. That is why Feet of Clay belongs in the simple next three. It teaches you that staying in one lane can reveal more variety, not less. You do not need Feet of Clay on day one. You do not need to buy 7 books before you know your taste. But if guards, and Men-at-Arms both land well, it rewards the reader who wants wit, structure, and social observation in the same package. Jingo. Jingo is the third next read in this beginner path, because it shows how far the City Watch lane can stretch while still feeling connected to the same core appeal. By the time you reach it, Discworld is no longer a confusing shelf. It is a set of routes you understand well enough to choose from. Jingo keeps the civic lens, but it broadens the scale and lets the satire look at group behavior, public stories, and the strange momentum of collective certainty. This is why the recommended path is not just guards, and then whatever looks nearby. The sequence guards, Men-at-Arms, Feet of Clay, and Jingo gives a new reader a coherent sample of Discworld at work. You see a city, you see its institutions. You see the route grow beyond a single premise. You also avoid the anxiety of deciding among dozens of covers after every book. A route removes friction. Jingo is not where I would begin. It works better after you have some comfort with the City Watch lane, but as part of the first small stack, it makes sense. It proves that the route can handle broader questions without becoming a lecture. If you reach Jingo and still want more, you are no longer a beginner trying to start Discworld. You are a Discworld reader choosing your next doorway. Guards. The most common Discworld mistake is assuming that the first published book must be the best first book. That rule works for many series, but Discworld is unusual. It developed over time. The earliest version of the series is more directly tied to fantasy parody, while the later voice becomes broader, warmer, and more socially observant. Starting at the very beginning can still work for some readers, but it is not the lowest friction path for most beginners. This does not mean the early books are unworthy. It means a beginner guide should optimize for trust, not completion. When someone asks where to start, they usually do not need a publication archive. They need a confident first experience. Guards gives that experience. Mort gives another strong route. Small Gods gives a standalone test. Wyrd Sisters gives the witch route. Those 4 options are clearer than telling a new reader to stare at the full shelf and hope the official order solves the anxiety. Save publication order for later if you become curious about the evolution of the series. That can be rewarding after you already know what Discworld is doing. For the first read, choose the book most likely to make the tone click. That is the practical rule. Start with clarity first. Let completeness come after confidence. Mort. If you are still unsure, choose your first Discworld book by taste rather than by chronology. Pick guards if you want the best all-around start and a route that can continue smoothly. Pick Mort if you want the stranger and more metaphysical side. Pick Small Gods if you want a standalone book with a strong central idea. Pick Wyrd Sisters if you want witches, folklore, theater energy, and a more rural kind of satire. This taste-based method is more useful than asking which book is objectively best. Discworld is loved by many different readers for different reasons. Some readers come for the jokes and stay for the compassion. Some come for the fantasy inversions and stay for the moral clarity. Some come for the satire and stay because the world feels more humane than expected. A good starting point should line up with the reason you were curious in the first place. Do not treat the alternates as second-class choices. Mort, Small Gods, and Wyrd Sisters are not wrong starts. They are more specific starts. Guards is simply the safest general recommendation because it introduces a durable route with broad appeal. If another doorway fits your taste better, use it. The right first Discworld book is the one that lowers resistance and makes the next book feel easy to choose. Guards. The best practical advice is to avoid buying a huge Discworld stack before you know which lane you enjoy. Start with one book. If you want the safest choice, make it Guards. If your taste points elsewhere, choose Mort, Small Gods, or Wyrd Sisters instead. Then decide after one complete reading experience. This keeps the series from feeling like homework before it has a chance to become enjoyable. Format is secondary. Paperback is easy for collecting one book at a time. Ebook is useful if you want to sample without shelf pressure. Audio can work especially well because Pratchett's sentence rhythm and comic timing often benefit from a steady narrator. The important thing is not owning the perfect edition. The important thing is removing friction from the first read. If Guards works, continue with Men-at-Arms, then Feet of Clay, then Jingo. If Mort works better, continue along that flavor later. If Small Gods is your test book, let it stand alone before deciding whether you want a subseries. If Wyrd Sisters works, follow the Witch route next. You do not need the full plan today. You need one calm first step and a simple second step if it lands. Guards. Final recommendation. Start with Guards if you want the best single Discworld entry for most readers. It gives you humor, city texture, social satire, fantasy absurdity, and a route that continues naturally. If that does not sound like your taste, use one of the three alternates. Choose Mort for the stranger side. Choose Small Gods for a standalone idea-driven start. Choose Wyrd Sisters for folklore, theater, and the witch lane. After Guards, the clean next three are Men-at-Arms, Feet of Clay, and Jingo. That small path is enough to turn Discworld from a confusing shelf into a readable plan. It also protects the beginner from the biggest mistake, which is trying to solve the whole universe before reading one book. You do not need to understand every subseries today. You do not need to be a completionist. You do not need a perfect chart. Start with one door. Let the tone prove itself. Then continue only if the reading experience feels rewarding. That is the most beginner-friendly way to approach Discworld. The full list of books from this starter path is in the description, so you can use it as a simple reference when you are ready to choose the next one.